The TV series The Last of Us caused a stir in 2023. Of course, I have something to tell you about it. It's a really cool project, and I have lots of interesting and useful information for you. I'll tell you everything you didn't know about The Last of Us series right now. Well, let's start with the main thing. The series is based on the popular video game of the same name. With some exceptions, video game adaptations such as the Tomb Raider franchise usually don't turn out very good. However, it seems that this version is different. The Last of Us is almost 100% adaptation, very close to the original. However, since the game is based on dialogue and character development, this story seems more suitable and natural for the film format. This is not like the situation where, for example, Jake Gyllenhaal had to learn parkour in the film adaptation of the video game Prince of Persia. The Last of Us is simply a drama brought to life. The game The Last of Us won over 200 awards, including Game of the Year, making it one of the most well-known and successful games of all time. Its sequel, The Last of Us Part 2, by the way, broke this record 7 years later. The first season of the series was mainly filmed in chronological order, which is rare for television. Bella Ramsey promised herself not to read social media comments when she was announced to play Ellie, saying it was her first experience with a lot of negative reactions, and she knew what to expect. At some point, Bella responded to the commentators saying, "I know, people are going to think what they are going to think. They are going to have to get used to it." In the first minutes of the show, the premise behind the zombie outbreak in The Last of Us is revealed. A fungus capable of taking over the motor functions of insects has evolved to infect humans. Fortunately, this is mostly an unrealistic concept, as the idea of humans turning into rage-filled zombies if infected by the fungus is not true. But the cordyceps fungus is actually real and can take over the minds of ants. Another indication of cordyceps' reality is the fact that it was first brought to public attention through the BBC documentary series Planet Earth, which showed the fungus acting on ants and is said to have inspired Neil Druckmann to create the original video game. It should be noted again that cordyceps doesn't pose a real threat to us. It is used in some medicines and even in some coffee substitutes that people drink for energy in the mornings. When the show was initially announced, small details leaked from time to time about where to watch, who was involved in the project, and what the show would be like overall. Fans were told that the first season would consist of 10 episodes, which is an average number for a streaming project these days. But as the premiere approached, the number of episodes was reduced to 9 for a very important reason. Initially, the series premiere consisted of 2 episodes, which HBO executives decided to combine into one, fearing that the first episode would not captivate viewers. In the first season, 46-year-old Pedro Pascal plays 56-year-old Joel. Pedro Pascal agreed to play Joel the day after he was sent the script. After a conversation with Neil Druckmann over Zoom, the role was given to him. Neil described it as follows: "For a while, we considered him as a potential candidate for this role, mainly because we knew that we would make a mistake if we just took a cool guy for the role of Joel. And I'm not saying that Pedro isn't cool. He can be very cool, but it's all the other aspects that are more interesting and harder to find in a really good actor. Someone you can just look in the eyes and find a tormented soul and charisma." The beauty of what Pedro does in the series is that he hides it all and doesn't reveal it, and then when Ellie pulls it out of him piece by piece, it becomes really convincing moments. Jensen Ackles mentioned that he really wanted to play the lead role of Joel, which was given to Pedro Pascal. Pedro Pascal based Joel's voice on his own experience growing up in San Antonio, Texas, opting out of the southern accent used in the game. Catherine Ann Moss was considered for the role of Tess before Anna Torv was chosen. Chris Pine, Nikolai Coster-Waldau, and Chris Pratt were also considered for the role of Tommy Miller before Gabriel Luna was chosen. Bella Ramsey cut off 40 centimeters of her hair to play Ellie. Ellie, who was 14 years old at the time, was played by 17-year-old Bella Ramsey, and unlike many other examples, Ramsey actually looks like she's 14 here. This is also justified by the fact that in the next season of the show, we will see Ellie as a 19-year-old, which is why Bella was chosen for the role. Although in the video game, Joel, Tommy, and Sarah are depicted as Caucasians, in the series, they are played by Pedro Pascal, a Chilean-American, Gabriel Luna, a Mexican-American, American, and Nico Parker, an Englishwoman of Zimbabwean descent, respectively. Similarly, although Maria is also depicted as a Caucasian woman in the game, she is played by African American actress Rutina Wesley in the series. Fans of the video game have long admired the original music written for it by Gustavo Santaolalla. Thus, they are undoubtedly grateful that Gustavo's work was also used for the show. The talented composer reworked the music he originally wrote for the game, along with some additions and new material to create the soundtrack for the new HBO drama. Here is a cool fact about The Last of Us that video game fans should be pleased about. Another testament to HBO's loyalty to the gaming franchise is that the show will even feature actors who voiced the video game characters, who will be reprising their roles. In some cases, such as with Marlene, played by Merle Dandridge, these actors will have prominent on-screen roles, while in others, such as with the demonic zombie clickers, the actors usually only provide voiceover work. The company HBO has brought many new stars to the series The Last of Us, but they have also invited some old friends. The show features many familiar faces, and this fact is quite obvious. In particular, the main characters of the show, Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey, are well known to HBO viewers. Both actors played recognizable characters in Game of Thrones, another HBO production. Pascal played the role of the enigmatic Prince Oberon Martell, and Ramsey played the precocious Lyanna Mormont. Both were fan favorites and died in a gruesome way in the series. Interestingly, in a joint interview about The Last of Us, both Pascal and Ramsey mentioned that they would like to have costumes from Game of Thrones in the new project. When asked which items they would like to have from their wardrobe in Game of Thrones, Pascal said he would like to have his golden mantle back. They also joked about how this would reflect on the world of The Last of Us, while Ramsey longed for her old armor. Here's another interesting detail about The Last of Us cast that might surprise you. Even as they prepared for this bold new venture, Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey were instructed not to play the video game on which the series is based. Details about this request are scarce, but it is assumed that the showrunners didn't want the main stars to be too busy imitating existing material. So far, this seems like a good decision, because Pascal and Ramsey have created their own version of Joel and Ellie. Despite this, Pascal admitted that he tried to ignore the instruction to avoid the game, saying that he felt it was important for him to experience the story for himself. Naturally, he could only do this by playing the game. However, he found that he wasn't very good at it and also worried about not falling into a model of imitation. Therefore, he gave the game to his nephew, who apparently played it much better. Once upon a time, The Last of Us was supposed to be adapted into a feature film, and director Sam Raimi was even attached to the project, having directed the Spider-Man films with Tobey Maguire and the Multiverse of Madness. Sony was developing the project, but it ultimately fell through, presumably due to creative differences between Neil Druckmann and the studio. It's interesting to wonder what Raimi would have brought to the film, but it's probably best that The Last of Us is shown as a TV series. The Last of Us TV series was filmed over the course of a year, from July 2021 to June 2022. Despite the story being set in cities like Austin, Texas and Boston, Massachusetts, the series was entirely shot in Alberta, Canada. The production involved removing trees and snow, changing the storefronts of local shops to better fit the show's theme, and shipping police cars from Texas for filming, making The Last of Us the largest television production in Canada's history. The casting for The Last of Us began in 2013, when gamers noticed the striking resemblance between Ellie and actor Elliot Page, then known as Ellen Page. Since then, several stars have been considered for the role in the adaptation. Maisie Williams from Game of Thrones was initially considered for a film that never saw the light of day, and Caitlin Dever was later cast in the role after going through all stages of auditions. While fans are still unsure if they like Bella Ramsey in the role of Ellie in the TV series, according to representatives from Naughty Dog, she is Ellie. We needed someone who could play a 14-year-old, and it's hard to find someone who can be a child and a good actor at the same time, and Bella naturally had all these qualities. The uniqueness of video games is that you don't need to look like your characters, so Ashley Johnson was able to play 14-year-old Ellie for the game when she was 27, and Troy Baker was a tall, skinny guy with bleached hair, but when he spoke and moved, he became his character. That's why the creators of the series couldn't take the same people for these roles in the TV show. There are plenty of expensive TV shows, and The Last of Us is among them. According to The New Yorker, HBO presented the show with a budget exceeding that of each of the first 5 seasons of Game of Thrones, considering that Thrones had a budget of approximately $6 million per episode, while The Last of Us has a budget of around $10 million per episode. The Screen Rant portal believes that the entire season cost about $100 million. Although the creator of the original video game, Neil Druckmann, is still involved in the adaptation. The show was also created by Craig Mazin, who has been a successful Hollywood screenwriter for many years, having written several parts of the Scary Movie series, sequels to The Hangover, and even worked on the 6th installment of Pirates of the Caribbean, which may or may not be released. But he is perhaps best known for his mini-series Chernobyl. If you watch the chilling series about the tragic nuclear disaster in Chernobyl, then you will find familiar notes of tension and existential anxiety in The Last of Us. Anne Varshainen, who voiced Tess in The Last of Us video game, died of an unknown form of cancer on the eve of the airing of the 3rd episode of this series. She was only 45 years old. Some of the most disturbing images and moments from early episodes of The Last of Us include fungal stalks emerging from infected humans in search of new prey. And for those who haven't played the video game, it may be interesting to know that these terrifying fungal tendrils are actually a departure from the original material. In the games, the spread occurs through spores, and characters protect themselves with gas masks. The creator of the series, Craig Mazin, noted that the change was made so that actors wouldn't have to constantly wear these masks, and also because spores too easily spread infection. Another difference between the series and the game, and quite a significant one by the way, is that the series clearly shows that zombies are connected in extensive fungal communities. We don't know for sure if this is not the case in the games, but it is definitely not portrayed in the same way. And considering that the series has already shown contact with a fungus that causes a kind of remote zombie call, it seems that this change will play a big role in the future of this entire story. Throughout most of the first episode, we constantly see the striking Nika Parker playing Sarah, Joel's daughter. If you thought Parker looked familiar, there might be a simple reason for that. In real life, she is the daughter of well-known actress Thandie Newton, and they have a striking resemblance. Of course, you may also have seen Parker in some of her previous work, such as movies like Dumbo and Memories, but you probably noticed that she is literally a clone of her mother. In the early episodes of The Last of Us, Ellie's switchblade is prominently featured, and it's clear that the weapon will be important in the future. For people unfamiliar with the franchise, it may be interesting to know that the game's story somehow confirms the significance of the knife. Essentially, it's Ellie's main weapon in the games, as well as a memory of her mother, Anna. Another detail that seems important in the early episodes is the Atkins diet. This isn't an Easter egg from the games, but rather a point of view based on what seems at first like a throwaway line from Joel. In the first episode, he refuses to eat based on the Atkins diet. It seems like a simple reference that helps show the story's beginning in the early 2000s when the diet was in vogue. However, when we learned that the fungal infection partially spreads through grains and flour, and consuming these isn't recommended on the Atkins diet, it seems that this little joke is also a nod to why Joel didn't get infected in the early stages. Sarah, his daughter, had nothing to do with the diet, but she also manages to avoid flour in the first episode. In this case, Sarah goes to the neighbor's house to help Mrs. Adler bake cookies, but she doesn't take any when she learns that they only have raisin cookies, not chocolate ones. It's a small moment, but it's likely why Sarah didn't get infected early on, and consequently, it's another reason why Joel comes out of the first episode unscathed. This may seem strange to those who haven't played video games, but The Last of Us is mostly about the dynamics between Joel and Ellie, and there are many jokes and notes concentrated here. In a big interview with the actors of the filming crew, Craig Mazin talked about the chemistry between them, stating that they genuinely love each other. He also noted that such a connection between actors cannot be predicted or created. To some extent, it is based on mere luck. It seems that the 1970 ballad is gaining popularity again, similar to the episode of Stranger Things with Kate Bush's song Running Up That Hill in 2022. The third episode of The Last of Us with Linda Ronstadt's song Long Long Time made the streaming of these tracks skyrocket on Spotify, reaching 4,900%. The show opens with a kind of talk show in which two scientists discuss big risks to humanity. This is the episode where John Hannah plays a scientist who unites the potential risk of people being infected by evolving fungus. It is noteworthy that this scene is original and not taken from the games. This is an excellent example of the hard work involved in a successful adaptation, intelligent drama and context that make the world extracted from a video game more realistic and unique for the audience. The scale here is of course astronomical. For the series, huge apocalyptic decorations had to be made that were used only once, like the interior of the Capitol building, which was built from scratch in a pavilion. The ultimate goal was to match the game's luxury, making it more realistic, and the art books from Naughty Dog, the company that developed the video games, were used as a starting point. The team spent a huge amount of time and resources creating a quarantine zone and shot only one episode there. Neil Druckmann talked about the second episode he was lucky enough to shoot. I'm standing in waders in the lobby of a flooded hotel, water up to my waist. I just couldn't believe what they had built for a scene that lasts only about a minute. There was even a training course for extras on movements to teach them how to move like zombies. Talking about the horrifying scene in the Capitol in the second episode, Neil and his team had to select dozens of infected people, completely apply artificial makeup to them, and create a training camp where they had to practice moving like the infected. To separate the infected from typical zombies, the team settled on the concept of transmission through so-called fungus tendrils. This came as a result of conversations with scientists and how the cordyceps works. The project's creators thought, what if it's not so much about bites and cruelty as it is about transplanting these tendrils from one carrier to another? As you can see in the second episode with Tess, if you don't resist, they won't become violent towards you. This is another important moment that is portrayed much better than in the games. The producers of The Mandalorian have allowed Pedro Pascal to work on the series The Last of Us simultaneously with their project. It is reported that the actor earns $600,000 per episode, making him one of the highest paid American TV stars today. The show has become popular on Indonesian social media, primarily because the opening scene of the second episode was set in Jakarta, the obvious epicenter of the pandemic. It also helped that Christine Hakim, one of Indonesia's most famous actresses, appeared in this scene. Overall, it was well crafted in depicting Indonesia in the early 2000s. HBO Max representatives have stated that more than 50% of all online interactions and messages on social media related to the series come from Brazil. In this case, it helped that the Brazilian dubbing for the game received high ratings and Brazilian voice actors returned for the series. Most viewers have not overlooked the fact that the series draws similar parallels to the real COVID-19 pandemic, and Ellie's statement that their crappy government couldn't prevent the pandemic reflects the opinion of many people about how different governments handled our real pandemic. Yes, I'm talking about the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still ongoing in 2023 in some parts of the world. And although the infected, who are sometimes referred to by different words, may seem like zombie-like creatures, fans and the production crew have never called them that. We were not allowed to say the words starting with Z on the set, said the series operator Eben Bolter. It was like a banned word. They were infected. We were not a zombie show. After the series premiered, many viewers unfamiliar with the original video game mistakenly referred to this project as a zombie show. Viewers often nitpick inaccuracies in the series. For example, it was pointed out that too many people use flashlights in the story, as the action takes place many years after the start of this catastrophe and the batteries should not be working. However, in 2022, there are solar batteries that only require the sun to charge, and flashlights that recharge themselves with multiple shakes, which people have been able to use for a long time. It seems that nowadays every adaptation has the right to criticism of minor changes to the source material. This happened with House of the Dragon, and there were also complaints on the internet, as was the case with The Last of Us. One of the creators of the series, Neil Druckmann, responded to the complaints, calling the fans mistaken. They cling to superficial things and think that if these things change, it means we did something wrong. But I would like to ask them, when you first played the game and you first met Sarah, were you influenced by her relationship with Joel or the fact that she had blonde hair? What is important and what is not? For me, it was more important to capture the essence of these characters when we filmed them, Neil said. You may be surprised, but The Last of Us has some potential to intersect with adaptations of Uncharted. Both game series were developed by Naughty Dog, and there are some signs, mostly from Easter eggs in The Last of Us, that they exist in a kind of shared universe. This doesn't mean that there will be intersections with the recent Uncharted movie starring Tom Holland in the lead role. But if The Last of Us is successful on HBO for several years, it is easy to imagine that both Naughty Dog and HBO would be interested in a new adaptation of Uncharted, rooted in The Last of Us. Aside from updated versions of the original games, there are essentially 2 video games for The Last of Us, as well as 1 DLC pack. Everything points to the fact that the show will be built in accordance with these games. That is, the first season will cover the game The Last of Us, as well as partly elements of the DLC called The Last of Us Left Behind. The second season will be dedicated to the events of The Last of Us Part 2. It remains unknown if this will be the end. There are rumors that Part 3 is in development, which could also mean an additional season for HBO. It is unknown if The Last of Us Part 3 will ever be released, but if it does, there is a chance that it will not be released by the time the first season of the series comes out, presumably in 2025-26, considering that each game in the series took about 3 years to make. At some point, The Last of Us inevitably faced comparisons to another phenomenally successful post-apocalyptic survival series, The Walking Dead. However, one of the key differences between the two shows will be their duration. The Walking Dead ran for 11 seasons or 11 years and is still alive thanks to various spin-offs that will appear in the coming years. The Last of Us, however, is going down a completely different path and will simply release 1 season for the first game and a second season for game number 2. We have no plans to tell any stories other than adaptations of the games, said Neil. If you liked this video, subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. See you in the next one.